We live in the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and it's being torn down and attacked from within with the help from governments and enemies overseas. AOC, Bernie Sanders, Tlaib, Omar, Mandami, they're the most radical of the bunch, but the entire Democrat Party enterprise exists to destroy the foundational structure of this nation. Hello, America. Welcome back to Liberty's Voice. I'm Mark Levin. We have a special program today. I love getting into our history, your history. This is, as they say, the 250th anniversary of the founding of America. It's so important that we understand how our nation was not just founded, what the ideas and the philosophies that undergird it, and the philosophers who were involved in it. I'll bet most Americans know more, at least generally, conceptually, about Marxism and communism than they know about John Locke. John Locke, or Montesquieu, and we'll get to him in a future program. Montesquieu, all these great Enlightenment thinkers. But you know who were obsessed with these Enlightenment thinkers? Your founders. The Enlightenment, Judeo-Christian values, I've talked about this many times, fused together to create the greatest nation on the face of the earth. We live in the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and it's being torn down and attacked from within with the help from governments and enemies overseas. AOC, Bernie Sanders, Tlaib, Omar, Mandami, they're the most radical of the bunch, but the entire Democrat Party enterprise exists to destroy the foundational structure of this nation. They never talk about the values, the principles, the belief systems, and they do that for a reason. And they're always talking about what? Think about this. Economics. Not smart economics, not economics in a right way, in a reasoned way, but they're always talking like Marxists about redistribution of wealth, about getting the successful people, about taxes on the rich and so forth and so on. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's not what this country's about. That's not about the foundational principles of this country. What is this country about? And why is it about certain things? And why do men go to war, a revolutionary war, to create what we now benefit from? So let's get started. We're going to spend the entire year on this and beyond if you keep watching. John Locke. The Enlightenment. Who is John Locke? Why is he important? The most important philosopher during the Revolutionary period. He wrote a book called The Second Treatise on Government. Probably the most important book other than the Bible, relied on not exclusively, but significantly, by the people who founded this nation. The basis for the Declaration of Independence. He was an English philosopher, he was a physician, and he was more than that. He's one of the leading lights of the Enlightenment. What was the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment was a period of philosophical birth about humanity and the individual, rights and liberties, reason, private property. Developed an entire philosophy, thinking process that you and we constitutional conservatives today share, and I believe most Americans, if it's explained. What I'm going to explain to you in the next 30, 40 minutes is not taught in elementary schools and middle schools or high schools. It's not taught in colleges and universities, most of them, unless you seek it out in a particular course and so forth. What is taught? One hate America course after another. One hostile ideology to the American system after another. And so I want to use this platform, you, Mr. and Mrs. America, to spread the word of Americanism, which is the most humane culture, society, system on the face of the earth ever developed and established by a group of human beings. That is what we're celebrating 250th anniversary. John Locke wrote about natural rights. Natural rights. What are natural rights? So we're going to summarize these things, and I hope it piques your interest to dig further. Life, liberty, property. Now, this word property has been abused by the left, by the Marxists, communists. Property rights? What is that? What do you do most days? What do you do most days? You work. Some of you are involved in work that's more physical than intellectual. Some of you are involved in more work that's intellectual than physical, but you're involved in both. You have a limited time on this earth. Your labor, whether it's intellectual or physical, whether it's brain power or muscle power, belongs to you. Your labor is your manifestation of your existence, of your life. So you spend a big chunk of your life on labor. Now, Marx would say, that's right, and he'd go into his thing, and we'll get into that another day. But what Locke and the Enlightenment philosophers would say, that belongs to you. So whatever you manifest through your labor belongs to you. Your property rights, physical property rights, they are a right that belongs to you. A God-given right that belongs to you because it's an extension of your existence, your limited time on earth, that you've applied your labor to. So when you're successful and you buy a home, that home belongs to you. That's your property right. And nobody should be able to take it, confiscate it for somebody else, redistribute it. So we start at that baseline. Yes, we have taxes and so forth and so on in order to do what? To keep the community together, to support the society, but not as an economic ideology to redistribute wealth from your labor, your limited time on earth, to somebody else. To somebody else. That's why property rights are so important. And Madison wrote a very famous treatise on property rights, and he said property rights go beyond physical property, land and buildings and so forth. And he writes extensively about the proposition that I'm presenting to you. Property rights include your property right in your opinion, your property right in your thought process, your property right in so many respects. If the government doesn't respect your physical property rights, it doesn't respect any of your property rights, because again, your physical property rights spring from your life, your labor, your existence. That's why property rights are so important, and that's why the Marxists and the Islamists keep attacking it, believe they have the right to confiscate it, and to do with your property rights what they wish. To control your property rights is to control you as an individual. It's to control your labor. It's to control your thought processes. That's why they hate private property rights, individual private property rights. Natural rights, life, liberty, property. Now, what do we mean by life and liberty? We mean, as Alexis de Tocqueville would write sometime later in Democracy in America, his 2 volumes, there's a circle around you as an individual of liberty, of sovereignty, that should never be molested by government or anybody else. Your sovereignty, your liberty, life, liberty, and property. This is derived from what? Natural law. Natural law, the natural state of things. The natural state of things that exists because your Creator created them. God, the divine, created them just as He created you. You're a creature of God. Everything around you, nature is a creation of God. So this governs individuals, leading to individuals voluntarily, if they choose, coming into a social compact. Now, what's a social compact? Well, we can live on our own. You know, I can go to Alaska, live on my own, do this, do that. But most people don't do that, do they? Most people are communal in the sense that they live with other people, they rely on other people for other things and support and all that sort of thing. We call that a society. A society. Individuals voluntarily come into a society. Locke called that a social contract or a social compact. You voluntarily enter into this. And so, how do you have a governing system when you have this society? Locke and others, but Locke in particular, talks about you have a governing system that is very limited, that its purpose is to attend to, nurture, defend, and promote the society of individuals, sovereign individuals in a sovereign society, the people. And how do you form such a government? By the consent of the people who participate and voluntarily join this society. Hence the consent of the governed. Locke said no government is legitimate unless it has the consent of the governed. See, this turns communism, Islamism, upside down. You exist for the cause. You exist for the government. You exist for the leaders. They believe they have some kind of divine will, in the case of Islamism, and they rule simply by power. In the case of Marxism, they claim to do so in the name of the people, but the people have absolutely nothing to do with it. No say, no consent. So the consent of the governed in a limited government that has as its purpose to protect your natural, God-given individual rights, and to have a civil society so that when people interact, they aren't violating the God-given natural rights of another person. Hence you have rules. Hence you have laws. And those rules and laws, as explained in our Declaration of Independence, need to be equally applied in the same circumstances. Because God creates individuals. He doesn't create races of individuals. He creates individuals, individual free will. Now, this requires a government that is established by the consent of the people. No other government is legitimate. Individual rights spring from natural rights. Those rights, again, life, liberty, and property. And they are unalienable. That is, if they come from God, and you're God's creature, and there is this circle of liberty that nobody is free to penetrate, not any collection of individuals, government, not any groups, not any other individual. Those are unalienable rights given to you by God. They are divine rights. The individual is sovereign. We talked about that. Society is the voluntary coming together of sovereign individuals. Society is a people, is a sovereignty. It is a collection. And really, in the West, and especially the United States, it's the only place where this is recognized. Think about this. Locke was one of the greatest philosophers of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was the 17th and 18th century, really a fairly tight period of human existence. It emphasized reason, or what we call right reason. You can reason a lot of things, but sometimes when you reason a lot of things, you don't come to the right conclusion, right? You can reason, if I rob a bank, I'll get money. We talk about right reason. The Enlightenment emphasized individual sovereignty, free will and liberty, human rights, what we today call civil liberties, and property rights. in the individual and in the society. This is also why what Marx called capitalism, what we call voluntary market system, economic system, is so crucial to understand. Socialism is an appendage to communism. Socialism can exist without communism. Socialism exists in fascistic societies, in monarchical societies, in Islamic societies, in quote-unquote small d democratic societies. But socialism is a poison to the whole structure of natural rights and individual free will. What we call today capitalism, voluntary free market economic activity and commercial activity, is crucial and married to property rights, as property rights are crucial to individual liberty because it's your labor. Once again, the more the government regulates, the more the government taxes, the more the government takes, the less liberty you have as an individual, and the more your labor is labor on behalf of the government, on behalf of politicians, on behalf of whatever and whomever. What else was the Enlightenment about? Progress, not progressivism, a word stolen by the American Marxists after the death of Karl Marx. Progress. Through what? Right reason. Progress. Intellectual progress, educational progress, economic progress, human progress generally. Right reason and science. Science in what respect? The physical sciences, physics and so forth and so on, not behavioral science, which would come later and pervert the whole idea of science. Not political science. We're talking about real scientific activity. So progress through right reason and science. Why? To accumulate what? Knowledge. Knowledge. Right reason, experience, science, to accumulate knowledge. This was revolutionary. Consider what was before. Economic feudalism, the right of divine rulers, not so much education and knowledge, but indoctrination. This Enlightenment, that's why we call it the Enlightenment era, was something wholly new. It took human beings as they are, as individuals, motivated by different things, different levels of smarts, different levels of physical ability. That's human nature. And brought them together and underscored the importance of these God-given characteristics in each individual. And yet they knew from experience and the Bible that humans have a very dark side, that humans can be very evil, and that humans need what? They need what? Moral precepts, moral rules, God-given. So then you have the fusion of the Enlightenment principles. So we have what I call the fusion of the Enlightenment, the principles and the ideas and the Enlightenment, and Judeo-Christian values and beliefs. That is, shared ethical, moral, and beliefs. The foundation that runs from Judaism into and through Christianity. You know, there's an effort now to argue, and you'll hear this by Tucker Carlson, you'll hear it by Islamists, you'll hear it by people who really do not have the nation's best interests at heart, or who are anti-Semites or anti-Christian, but I call all of this milieu Americanism. Americanism. You have people who argue there is no joining or flowing from the Hebrew Bible to the New Testament, from the Ten Commandments, Moses, Judaism to Christianity. that Christianity has replaced Judaism. That is an impossibility in every respect. Whether you read the Bible and embrace the Bible and believe in the Bible, whether you, as a matter of logic and reason, understand how one flows from one to the other or into the other. In fact, Judaism and Christianity are the only two faiths that share such significant belief systems. They don't share it with Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. It doesn't mean that Judaism and Christianity are at war with them. In fact, we find that Islam's at war with Judaism and Christianity. That for another day. The point is that Judaism and Christianity are linked. In fact, Judaism in the United States wouldn't be as freely practiced but for Christianity and the beneficence of the Christian faith. Now, that's being ripped as a result of evil forces, demagogues, propagandists, outside forces. So it's more important than ever that Jews and Christians remain bound, that we're not torn apart by these evil elements. Because if we are, we won't survive in this country. And these outside forces and now internal forces are very powerful. Very powerful. The fusion of Marxism and Islamism and this neo-fascist woke rightism is the gravest threat we face today in this country. Again, I've talked about this before. I want to stay on topic. We'll talk about that again another day. So Christians and Jews have shared ethical, moral, and belief systems, and believe that the foundation of this country is the Creator. That's why Washington was so fond of the Jewish community. Jefferson was so fond of the Jewish community. John Adams, more so than most, so fond of the Jewish community. You will find that the founders were incredibly knowledgeable about what we call, or they called, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, as Christians call it. They knew it. They would quote it chapter and verse because they understood the connection between Judaism and Christianity, and they understood the importance of fusing the Judeo-Christian belief system with the Enlightenment. This is incredible. This is your country. This is your history. I understand that there are books written about white supremacy and racism and the 1619 Project and CRT and DIE and DEI and whatever you want to call all this. They're all efforts to destroy this magnificence of this country. It's so incredible what our founders created and the ideas and the beliefs that they're founded on. Nothing before ever existed, and I dare say nothing after the United States, God forbid, will ever exist either. The sanctity of life, God-given, unalienable individual rights, eternal truths like good versus evil, the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, free will, plus personal responsibility and accountability. This all comes from the Judeo-Christian shared foundational moral framework given to us by God. Rooted in Judaism, adopted through Christianity, its enormous influence on Western society. And you can see in Europe, as it's more secularized and through immigration, more Islamization, that Europe is crumbling. It's crumbling because the Enlightenment means nothing if it's not undergirded by this belief system. And you can see in our own country the efforts to continually secularize the country, or worse, advance the cause of an alien ideology through Islam or Marxism that was born in Germany and England, Islam that was born obviously in the Middle East. But these are alien ideologies to Americanism. And this is why I've written in several books. I won't say preached, but made the point that Americanism and Islamism are utterly incompatible. Americanism and Marxism are utterly incompatible. This is your history. And I've only gotten started, barely gotten started. Wait until we get to Montesquieu and Adam Smith and some of the others. This is your history. This is the 250th anniversary of America. These crucially important, humane, civil philosophies fusing with the Judeo-Christian values and belief system, morals, and so forth. You may never see this again. We may never see this again as a people. I want to go a little bit deeper in my book, Ameritopia, the influence of John Locke on the founders. In 1776, the Continental Congress established the Committee of Five to draft a declaration to the world setting forth the American colony's justification for seeking independence from Great Britain, right there in Philadelphia. It appointed John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and you're going to learn more about every one of these people, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia to this committee. People don't even know who Sherman or Livingston are. These men were crucial to the founding of this nation. Again, we're going to do this. The committee assigned Jefferson the task of drafting the original version. He was very young. I believe he was 31 or 32. Jefferson's draft was modified by Franklin and Adams, submitted to Congress, and Congress made further modifications. But the basic document remained largely unchanged from Jefferson's version. So it is important to recognize, it is crucial to recognize the profound influence John Locke's second treatise, and you can read this on your own, had on the founders, especially Jefferson. The Declaration of Independence represents the most prominent official consensus position of the founders and the rationale for declaring independence, and importantly, the philosophical origin of the new country, your country. Jefferson and the delegates borrowed heavily from Locke's thinking and words, and I'm going to give you some examples now. First example. In the second treatise, John Locke writes, I quote from Locke, "The constitution of the legislative is the first and fundamental act of society, whereby provision is made for the continuation of their union under the direction of persons and bonds of laws made by persons authorized thereunto, but the consent and appointment of the people, without which no one man or number of men amongst them can have authority of making laws that shall be binding to the rest." I'm reading to you what the founders of your nation read on their own, the same words. "When anyone or more shall take upon them to make laws, whom the people have not appointed to do so, they make laws without authority, which the people are not therefore bound to obey, by which means they come again to be out of subjugation, and may constitute to themselves a new legislative body, as they think best, being in full liberty to resist the force of those who without authority would impose anything upon them." So Locke is asserting that laws made by men or governments without the consent of the governed are illegitimate, and no man is bound by them. And under these circumstances, he explains that men are not only free to resist such a force, but they are free to form a new government. your Declaration of Independence. What does it say? It's whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, the ends that they discussed previously, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and originating its powers in such form, and so forth. Locke also writes, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, this is key, property, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any farther obedience, and are left to common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. What I have said concerning the legislative in general holds true concerning the supreme executor. Now, very interesting. He's talking about the legislative and executor. Some of the earliest discussions about separation of powers. The legislative, we call it Congress, and the executor. We call it the executive branch and president. Some of the earliest references to this notion of separation of powers. He doesn't dig into it. Montesquieu does, who's also of the Enlightenment, again, for another day, but he's already raising that as an issue. The legislative and the executor. The people who write the rules and the people who execute the rules. If they are not there legitimately, then the rules are not legitimate, their actions are not legitimate, and the people are free to reject it or even replace it and them. That's his point. That's your Declaration of Independence. What I have said concerning the legislative in general holds true concerning the supreme executive, who, having a double trust put in him both to have a part in the legislative, back then the notion of a parliament, and the supreme execution of the law, acts against both when he goes about to set up his own arbitrary will as the law of society. You can imagine that John Locke was not in favor with the king. He never attacked the king specifically, the monarchy specifically, but the monarchy viewed him as a grave danger. And he would write these brilliant things, and his second treatise on government wasn't the only book or essay that he wrote. He wrote some other great things. But he was always in fear of his life, quite frankly. And you will find that as we do this video cast over time. Cicero was in fear of his life during the Roman period. In fact, he was murdered. And you will find this with a number of these men who were really the foundational principles of humanity today as we understand it. Locke is not only underscoring his earlier point about man's right to resist the illegitimate arbitrary power of government, I write, particularly relating to his property rights. He's going further. That is, no government, including one established by the consent of the government, has authority to violate man's inalienable rights. Okay, we have a government set up by the consent of the people. But now that government, or the people who run the government, are violating the individual's unalienable rights. That's not legitimate either, says Locke. Locke explains that the law of nature exists above all else. All men are required to obey it, including those who hold public office. He says, thus the law of nature stands as an eternal rule to all men, legislatures as well as others. The rules that they make for other men's actions must, as well as their own and other men's actions, be conformable to the law of nature, that is, to the will of God, of which that is a declaration, and the fundamental law of nature being the preservation of mankind. No human sanction can be good or valid against it. Your life, your liberty, your property. Divine. Even if you set up the greatest government mankind can establish, if they violate your rights as a sovereign child of God, it is illegitimate. So the first sentence of the Declaration encapsulates Locke's view. of the preeminence of natural law and the right to disobey and indeed throw off a government that abuses its power. It states when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for the people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them one to the other, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, as I explained, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. There are multiple examples of the founders and the Declaration using Locke's thinking and arguments. I have several examples in my book, Emeritopia. Let's hit one more. Locke writes, "The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it." Now you'll notice the Declaration talks about the state of nature and the law of nature, nature's law, which obliges everyone and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. For men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business. Isn't it interesting that while the Enlightenment emphasizes reason and knowledge and science, what else does it emphasize? Where does all this come from? God. It's not man-made. It comes from a superior, divine, provident God. And being furnished with like faculties, human beings, sharing all in one community of nature, these cannot be supposed any such subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another. Do not take from another person what God has given to that person. Life, liberty, property. As if we are made for one another's uses. He rejected slavery, as you can imagine, Locke. In fact, the Enlightenment rejected slavery. It's another important part of the Western history. As the inferior ranks of creatures are for ours, everyone as he is bound to preserve himself and not to quit his station willfully. So by the like reason, when his own preservation comes not in competition, ought he as much as he can to preserve the rest of mankind. That is, your fellow human beings should try and preserve the same God-given rights that you have for others in that civil society. The founders embraced Locke's vision that all men are blessed by God with inalienable rights, the life, the liberty, health, limb, or goods of another, as he put it, which they described this way. Again, your Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the job of government to preserve those rights. One more example. Again, there are many in my book, Emeritopia, but I want to make the case that is not made in our public schools, that is not made in our colleges and universities, least of which are Ivy League schools, that are not made in our mass media. Again, Locke explains that any government not established by the consent of the governed is illegitimate, and therefore its laws are illegitimate. He wrote this, "Nor can any edict of anybody else, in what form soever conceived, or by what power soever backed, have the force and obligation of a law which is not its sanction from the legislative, which the public has chosen and appointed. For without this, the law could not have that which is absolutely necessary to be its being a law, the consent of the society, over whom nobody can have a power to make laws, but by their own consent and by authority received from them." No kings, no dictators, no massive bureaucracy, even though it is created by the people who we've given consent to govern. If it turns out that bureaucracy is more than administrative, that it is literally passing thousands of laws with taxes and fines and so forth and so on, Locke would argue that's not legitimate. because the people have no input on that. Well, we get to vote for people. No. A legislator, he would say later in his second treatise on government, does not have the right to delegate to somebody else the authority given to that individual by the people. So, as I point out, nor can a government established by the consent of the people exercise absolute power or surrender its legitimate power to another. In either case, the people, I write, are free to replace the officials with others or disband the government altogether and form a new one. And it goes on. If I have even a little bit triggered your interest in this topic, it's available to you everywhere. In my books, like Ameritopia, Rediscovering Americanism, it's available to you. There are books and books and books on John Locke. I prefer on my own to read the original manuscripts, the original documents. You can read the second treatise yourself. I've taken aspects of that and have highlighted what I think needs to be highlighted and have applied it to your Declaration of Independence. You need to know that the entire progressive movement, born after the death of Karl Marx in 1883, self-identified as progressive, as I explained in the first program, and there's nothing progressive about it. The Americanization of Marxism, as I wrote in my book, American Marxism, they take the Marxist ideology, the centralization of power, in order to try and remake nature's law, to remake what is expressed in the Declaration of Independence. And we'll get into this in another program, but Woodrow Wilson, as president of Princeton University and later as president of the United States, went to great lengths to attack the Declaration of Independence. The part of it that really matters. He would go to the end of it, where the colonists listed all their complaints against the monarchy in Britain. And he said, focus on that, because they insisted on fixing the problems and this, and he rejected the front end, like the Marxists do. Oh, that's all very interesting. Marx used to mock it. Oh, that's all great. You'll even remember when Obama used to read from or quote the Declaration of Independence. What did he leave out? The Creator. And yet that's crucial. And as I said in the first program, some of you watching might be atheists, you may be agnostic, you may not be sure. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you your history as an American. And thanks to the Judeo-Christian belief and value system and the combination, and thanks to the Enlightenment, you're free to believe or not believe whatever you want. And we'll get to the Constitution later. You're free to express it. You're free to organize. Americans against God. You can organize whatever you want as long as you don't molest other people, as long as you don't destroy or seek to destroy their rights and their freedoms. Do as you wish. You can worship hamsters. You can do whatever you want. We have people going around worshiping fuzzy animals or whatever. Okay, great. Not great, stupid, but you get the point. That is thanks to the founders of this country. There's not an Islamic regime in the world that tolerates that. There's not a Marxist regime in the world that tolerates that. And both of those ideologies, as I speak to you today, are trying to devour our country, both within and without. And we have an educational system now that doesn't reinforce or even teach John Locke or the founding in an honest way. They're trying to teach our young people, and as they get older, indoctrinate them to hate our country, both by ignorance, exclusion, censorship, and by affirmative ideological brainwashing. This comes later through this so-called progressive movement, which is an offshoot of Marxism, German Marxism, but American Marxism as I call it. And John Dewey, who basically was the brain trust, the single brain trust around destroying and changing our public education system, as I touched on in the first program. We're going to get into all this. We've got plenty of time. But I will tell you what I've told our folks here. As long as people are watching this video cast, I will do it. When people stop watching the video cast, I will stop. I do understand now how this business works after 3 days. If I got behind this microphone and started screaming and yelling about Jews, and screaming and yelling about Christian Zionists, and screaming and yelling about Netanyahu, and genocide, and starvation, and screaming and yelling about Donald Trump, and how horrible a country this is, a dictatorship run by Hitler and on, I would quickly have 1 million viewers. Aggregate news sites like Mediaite, like the Drudge Report and others would take the clips and run with it, stir the pot, because there is an ugly truth to this. It's called grifting. You want as many followers, subscribers, eyes as possible on your program. And these people believe, and to some extent they might be right, that the way to do that and to enrich yourself is to spew bigotry, racism, anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, and to sort of frame it as rebellious, frame it as revolutionary, frame it as cutting edge, frame it as looking out for the little guy, for put upon young men. It is a poison. It is a cancer. I'm trying to do this completely differently. I'm not looking for cheap attention, headlines. I'm talking to you, Mr. and Mrs. America, and the rest of the world that will listen. That's what we're doing here. So as long as you're watching, I will do it. When you're not watching or you stop watching, I'll move on. That means I have not succeeded, and I think that means that I have to try other things, try and reach more and more people beyond my video podcast, my radio show, and my Fox show. But you're here for a reason. You're great patriots. You believe in this country. Please spread the word to as many people as you can to view the program. You can view it on Rumble by following us. You can view it on YouTube by subscribing for free. We're going to put it on other platforms as well in the near future. I want to thank you. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.